Hello, BookTube, and hello, lovers of romance novels out there. This is a second channel that I've started with Sarah at the Bookish Knitter, where we're talking about category romances, which you will think of as synonymous with Harlequin romances. Category romances are a separate thing from the rest of the romance world. The categories are specifically notated, they're usually restricted in page length. Usually, they're very, in other words, formulaic. And that has caused them to be looked down upon by everyone else in the reading world, and also by a lot of people in the romance world. But they're really good. If you play by their rules, which you must do with epic science fiction or historical fiction or anything, if you play by the rules of category romances, there's a lot of enjoyment to be got from them. And in Harlequin's line, there are a bunch of different categories that we'll be going over on this channel. Uh, there's a normal Harlequin romance. There's Harlequin Presents, which is a little bit spicier than Harlequin romances themselves usually are. There's Harlequin Heartwarming, for instance, that isn't spicy at all. It's meant to pull at your heartstrings. There are usually intrigue or extra action-oriented lines. There's also a historical line set in different time periods. We saw one of those last time. It's a lot to get through. Harlequin comes out with a full slate of category romances every month, and they have for a long, long time. So in addition to going through that mind-boggling variety that comes out every month, I also thought that it'd be nice to look at earlier category romances too. Although I could talk about one category romance every day for the rest of time, and I wouldn't even scratch the surface of how many there are out there. But I figure in between reviews of newer releases, it might be fun to look at older releases. That's what we're doing today. We're looking at an old Harlequin Presents from 2014. This is by Caitlin Cruz, and it's called His for a Price. And there we have the two characters in a library. Apropos of the novel, since the first main scene between the first scene between the hero and heroine takes place in the library of a posh mansion in the Hudson Valley up north from New York, which is the home headquarters of the Whitaker family, industrialist sort of business world, think succession, that sort of thing, a business world empire that was created by Big Bart Whitaker from nothing, basically as an act of stubbornness. He just decided, I will make an empire of my own, the ultimate self-made man. And as this novel begins, we learn that Big Bart dropped dead abruptly without making plans for the future of his financial empire at all. That phrase, drop dead, is used a few times. I think it's Caitlin Cruz trying to be unsentimental, but it'll work against you if you read this novel the way I did, because you're going to want to know more about Big Bart, and you never do. He seems more interesting, I have to say, than most of the characters that are actually in the drama. the characters that are in the drama, there are three, but mainly two. There's Maddie Whitaker, who has been called to the mansion in the Hudson Valley by her brother, Chase, who is trying to save their company in the wake of their father's unexpected death. Their mother died when they were children. Their father's unexpected death now, when they're adults, and when Chase has made an infamous name for himself in the London tabloids by catting all around London, and where Maddie has felt herself comfortably free of the family tentacles, all that comes to an end because the business is in jeopardy. The business their father built is in jeopardy of going away, of being poached or undermined. And there's a way out of that. There's a rival business empire that is headed by Nico Stathis, the man on the cover there, who is well known to Maddie. They have been sort of fencing amorously for the whole of their adult lives since she was a teenager. Never really get that clear an idea of how old Nikos is, but that's a holdover from when romances did that all the time, when the male lead was supposed to be comfortably older and more secure than the woman. The main character, the heroine of the story, was perfectly free to grow from green immaturity to maturity, but the man, no, he is alpha male force of nature from the beginning. he's waiting in the library of that house. Chase informs Maddie that the price he wants for saving their company is her hand in matrimony. And Maddie is outraged and says to her brother, "What is this, the Middle Ages?" And he says, "You'd be surprised. He's not going to own you. You'll still be an individual person, but this will really help my standing with the board. He will really help my standing with the board. And this is what he wants. If we're going to save the family, the company, our way of life, then you need to do this." And she is outraged but resigned and goes to meet Nico in the library. And they hash it out. And Caitlin Cruz does a really good job of threading in between their scene. They have a long scene in the library where they talk about what is happening here and why it's happening. And she does a really good job of threading throughout that scene little controlled flashback bursts to the previous times that they have crossed swords, to the previous times that Nico has been telling her, disturbingly, for 10 years or more, that someday she will be his wife. He's 100% sure of it from the very first of the earliest of those flashback scenes. Some of the flashback scenes in these early scenes also flash back to when Maddie and Chase were little kids, when their mother was still alive. Their mother died in a car accident. And some of those flashbacks to her and to the build-up to that car accident seem to be building to something else as well. And that also is controlled and well done. But when you're reading this opening scene and then you follow, of course, the wedding, the marriage has to go through. But Maddie is, all her hackles are up. She hates the idea that she's being traded as a commodity. She mentions many times, both to her brother and to Nico himself, that she feels like a pawn. And Nico rather condescendingly says, "No, you're not a pawn, you're a queen." But he still makes it pretty clear right from the beginning that he plans to control her. You'll quit your job, for instance. I will determine where you go and when you go there. And, of course, a main goal here will be to have children. I want children from you, and you will act happy, and you will go with me to events, and you will be seen on my arm. And Maddie agrees, because she doesn't feel that she has a way out that won't betray everything that meant everything to her father. And you might think when you're reading this, well, okay, this was written 10 years ago, but that's not enough. And then gradually, Caitlin Cruz reveals why Maddie would have this psychological investment in doing right by her father, even though he's dead, drop dead by the time this book starts. And the reason that I'm not spoiling anything here because this is a 10-year-old category romance, but the reason that gradually, very skillfully is unveiled, is that Maddie was in the back seat of the car and fooling around, as she thinks, distracting her mother when the car crash happened that killed her mother. And has been deep down inside feeling that she's responsible for that death all along. At one point later on in the book, when Nikos and Maddie have had lots of serious arguments, it's a savage relationship despite the sexual element. But we're told, Caitlin Cruz tells us all throughout this book, that Nico actually loves her. He tells her that. He tells her, I want this because I love you. I will have my own way, and it will be inextricably tied to business, but I'm doing it because I love you. I have always loved you. I don't really believe it, but I'll come to that. But at one scene in the climax of the book, he lowers his voice to almost a whisper and says to her, "It was an accident, Maddie." He is not willing to let her blame herself for this. And that works really well. Those moments work really well. There are a few of them scattered throughout, especially the second half of the novel, where we see the human side of Nico, where he knows what he wants. He wants her as a possession as well as a wife, but there are moments in the second half of the book where he shows a softness like that, where he shows that he is actually motivated by love. And I appreciated the way this novel was constructed, but I come back to my original statement. That's not enough. That's not good enough. I realize this was written 10 years ago, but it wasn't written 110 years ago. And that is unacceptable. It's not. It ruins your ability to be able to root for Nico, and you pretty much have to, unless he's the villain, unless he's someone that the novel is wanting Maddie to stab in his sleep or leave. Then he can't be the hero. I realize that the social discourse on the relationship between the sexes has grown more complicated, more nuanced. I would say in leaps and bounds, more even-handed, better. Romances don't typically present stories like this anymore, not because they've gone out of fashion, but because they're unacceptable. And I kept thinking that when I was reading this book, that it isn't that Nico has the upper hand, and it isn't that Maddie is defiant and a little bratish. It's that he shouldn't say these things. He shouldn't want these things, and we shouldn't care about him if he does. They make him the bad guy, regardless of whether or not the narrator or the narration of the book actually steps in and says that some of these things are probably for her own good. They aren't. That's not what marriage is. You don't become the property of your husband anymore. And this book doesn't seem all that upset with that earlier idea of marriage, which I would argue was already out of fashion, seriously out of fashion, and also out of law when this book came out in 2014. It certainly isn't. It isn't. I don't think it's conceivable now. Maybe Sarah will tell me that I'm wrong. Maybe she'll say that romances like this do happen still. Certainly, she's read a mountain of them where the man is simply going to be like this in the book. He's going to tell the woman, "You will be mine. You will be my possession. I will be everything to you, and you will like it." A slave, basically. She's read a mountain of those, and so have I. But they tend to be older, not something in the 21st century. So that element of this surprised me. I would argue that Caitlin Cruz largely revives. She largely snatches it from the jaws of defeat, but in the second half of the book, where Nico is more human. But I don't think it happens fast enough. And there's a lot of romances in this book. Let me give you an example here of what I'm talking about. Maddie is forever on the verge of I don't know, having an epileptic seizure whenever she sees Nico, because he's just that gorgeous. He was as absurdly gorgeous as ever, damn him. No disfiguring accidents had turned him into a troll since she'd last seen him at her father's funeral. Her father loved him, loved Nico, considered him more of a son than he considers her own brother, because Nico has the ruthless business ambitions that Big Bart had. He was as smoothly muscled as he's been when he was in his 20s and honed to steel-like perfection by the construction work he'd somehow catapulted into a multi-million-dollar corporation by the time he was 26. The fine, hard lines of his face were nearly elegant, while his corded strength was as apparent in the line of his pugilistic jaw as in that impossibly chiseled chest of his that he'd concealed very poorly today behind a tight, black, obviously wildly expensive t-shirt that made no concession whatsoever to the weather. He was too elemental. He'd always made the hair at the back of her neck stand on end, her nipples pull painfully taut, and her stomach draw tight, and today was no different. Which, when I read that nowadays, when I read something like that nowadays, I think, well, maybe you've just got the flu. And he tells her, "I'm marrying you because I want you. I always have. More than that, I want to merge my company with your father's, and I want the link between us to be strong. I want to be part of the family, so there can never be any question about who deserves a seat at the table. That means marriage, babies, a very long life together, because I don't believe in separations or divorce or secrets." And I read a passage like that, especially with all this garbage about Steven Crowder that's in the news this week, and I think, well, what if she believes in divorce? It seems weirdly Paleolithic in a way that again, this is my impression, I might be wrong, but I get the impression that most Harlequin category romances have abandoned this kind of talk, this kind of conception, where we'll see it when we look at older category romances. It's a big thing where the woman is awakened to her womanhood, to passion, but she's done that is all done by the man, and she belongs to him. Often, especially when she is captive in a harem, literally belongs to the man. But there's another that happens in this book. where Maddie is gradually just subsumed by Nico. She's always been madly attracted to him, and now that she actually has been forced to marry him, the brakes are off. So we're told Maddie didn't know when it all changed. One moment she was counting all the things that weren't painful, and then the next she couldn't count because it was all too much. It was fire and glory. It was beautiful and wild. It was a perfect storm of pure insanity, and Nicodemus was orchestrating it all. That description is taking place during a certain activity in the novel that doesn't happen in a lot of Harlequin category romances, but in Harlequin Presents, it can. You have to have your guard up for it. So that was. Let me get you the cover again here. That was a little blast from the past. That was oh my. Can I get to the cover here? The device should make it easy to do. I certainly don't have the, yeah, there we go. I certainly don't have the paperback. I don't come across tranches of these things all the time. The Brattle Bookshop is the used bookstore where I mostly go, and they don't do romances of any kind. Once upon a time, I had access to a romance bookstore, a romance, paperback exchange type bookstore that had mountains of these things. I have the ebook instead. But I won't say this was a total failure. There were parts of it that rang odd in 2023 that maybe wouldn't have felt as odd in 2014. I think some of them would. But the one thing that this reminded me of, the one thing that sort of came home to me when I was reading those and other descriptions about how Maddie is just going to be given as a boardroom perk to the business shark that wants the company. One of the things I was thinking about that is that it's a reminder that if you wait long enough, all novels become historical novels. This just, it hasn't been that long, but this very much struck me as a throwback to the vast majority of earlier Harlequin romances where the man is basically going to own the woman. But that is His for a Price by Caitlin Cruz. Just an older Harlequin romance. Maybe the next. I want to keep doing new releases, but maybe the next old one I do will be very old. Maybe I'll go to the 1960s or something like that and see what a randomly chosen Harlequin from back then will do to me, and I'll bring you along for the ride. So there's another review. That is Caitlin Cruz, His for a Price. I'll go back to new releases next time. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.